Finn and Liam. How are you doing? This is Aunt Claire. We're about to start chapter 8 of Chatterer the Red Squirrel, and this chapter is Chatterer Grows Careless. When last we left Chatterer, of course, he had just moved into his new home in a woodpecker hole near the old orchard, and because he had to move his home from the green forest so that Shadow the Weasel wouldn't get him. And we'll see what happens now. Chatterer grows careless. When you grow careless, even though it be in matters small, old Mr. Trouble you will find is bound to make a call. Some people never seem to learn that. You would suppose that after all the trouble and worry Chatterer the Squirrel had, he would have learned a lesson. For a while, it seemed as if he had. Morning after morning, before anybody was up in Farmer Brown's house, he visited Farmer Brown's corn crib, taking the greatest care not to be seen and to get back to his home in the old orchard before it was time for Farmer Brown's boy to come out and do his morning's work. And in the corn crib, he took the greatest care to steal only where what he took would not be missed. The empty cobs from which he had eaten the corn he hid in the darkest corner behind the great pile of yellow corn, where there would not be found until nearly all the corn had been taken from the crib. Oh, he was very sly and crafty, was Chatterer the Red Squirrel, at first. But after a while, when nothing happened, Chatterer grew careless. At first, it had seemed very dangerous to go over to the corn crib, but after he had been there often, it didn't seem dangerous at all. Once inside, he would just have himself up to having a good time. He raced about all over the great pile of beautiful yellow corn and found the loveliest hiding places in it. Down in a dark corner, he made a splendid bed from pieces of husk, which hadn't been stripped from some of the ears. It was quite the nicest place he had ever dreamed of, was Farmer Brown's corn crib. He got to feeling that it was his own and not Farmer Brown's at all. The more that feeling grew, the more careless Chatterer became. He dropped a grain of corn now and then, and he was too lazy to go down and pick it up, or else didn't think anything about it. Farmer Brown's boy, coming every morning for corn for the hens, noticed these grains, but supposed that they were some that had been rubbed from the ears during handling of them. Then one morning Chatterer dropped a cob from which he had eaten all the corn. He meant to get it and hide it as he had hidden other cobs, but he didn't want to do it just then. And later, well, then he forgot all about it. Yes, sir, he forgot all about it until he reached his home in the old orchard. Oh, well, thought Chatterer, it doesn't matter. I can get it and hide it tomorrow morning. Now, a corn cob is a very simple thing. Farmer Brown's boy knew where there was a whole pile of them. He added to that pile every day after shelling enough corn for the biddies. Biddies is another word for hens or chickens. So it would seem that there was nothing about a corn cob to make him open his eyes as he did that morning when he saw the one left by Chatterer the Red Squirrel. But you see, he knew that a bare corn cob had no business inside the corn crib, and suddenly those scattered grains of corn had a very new meaning for him. "Aha!" he exclaimed. "A thief has been here after all. I thought we were safe from rats and mice, and I don't see how they could get in, for I really don't see how they could climb the stone legs of the corn crib. But someone with sharp teeth certainly has been in here. It must be that I have left the door open sometime and a rat has slipped in. I'll just have to get after you, Mr. Rat or Mr. Mouse. We can't have you in our corn crib." With that, he went into the house. Presently, he came back, and in one hand was a rat trap, and in the other hand, a mouse trap. Chapter 9. Chatterer Grows Too Curious. Everyone knows how curious Peter Rabbit is. He is forever poking his wobbly little nose in where it has no business to be, and as a result, Peter is forever getting into trouble. Whenever Chatterer the Red Squirrel has heard a new story about Peter and the scrapes his curiosity has got him into, Chatterer has said that Peter got no more than he deserved. As for himself, he might be curious about a thing he saw for the first time, but he had too much sense to meddle with it until he knew all about it. So Chatterer has come to be thought very smart, quite too smart to be caught in a trap, at least to be caught in an ordinary trap. Now, a great many people manage to make their neighbors think that they are a great deal smarter than they really are, and Chatterer is one of this kind. If some of his neighbors could have peeped into Farmer Brown's corn crib the morning after Farmer Brown's boy found the telltale corn cob so carelessly dropped by Chatterer, they would have been surprised. Yes, sir, they would have been surprised. They would have seen Chatterer the Red Squirrel, the boaster, he of the sharp wits, showing quite as much curiosity as ever possessed Peter Rabbit. Chatterer had come over to the corn crib as usual to get his daily supply of corn. As usual, he had raced about over the great pile of yellow corn. Quite suddenly, his sharp eyes spied something that they hadn't seen before. It was down on the floor of the corn crib, quite near the door. Chatterer was sure that it hadn't been there the day before. It was a very queer-looking thing, very queer indeed. And then he spied another queer-looking thing near it, only this was very much smaller. What could they be? He looked at them suspiciously. They looked harmless enough. They didn't move. He ran a few steps toward them and scolded, just as he scolds at everything new he finds out of doors. Still, they didn't move. He ran around on a little ledge where he could look right down on the queer things. He was sure now that they were not alive. The biggest one he could see all through. Inside was something to eat. The littlest thing was round and flat with funny bits of wire on top. It looked as if it were made of wood, and in the sides were little round holes too small for him to put his head through. "Leave them alone," said a small voice inside of Chatterer. "But I want to see what they are and find out all about them." "No good ever comes of meddling with things you don't know about," said the small voice. "But they're such queer-looking things, and they're not alive. They can't hurt me," said Chatterer. Nevertheless, he ran back to the pile of corn and tried to eat. Somehow he had lost his appetite. He couldn't take his eyes off those two queer things down on the floor. "Better keep away," warned the small voice inside. "Won't do any harm to have a closer look at them," said Chatterer. So once more he scrambled down from the pile of corn and little by little drew nearer to the two queer things. The nearer he got, the more harmless they looked. Finally, he reached out and smelled the smallest. Then he turned up his nose. "Smells of mice," muttered Chatterer. "Just common barn mice." Then he reached out a paw and touched it. "Pooh," said he, "it's nothing to be afraid of." Just then he touched one of the little wires, and there was a sudden snap. It frightened Chatterer so that he scurried away. But he couldn't stay away. That snap was such a funny thing, and it hadn't done any harm. You see, he hadn't put his paw in at one of the little holes, or it might have done some harm. Pretty soon he was back again, meddling with those little wires on top. Every once in a while there would be a snap, and he would scamper away. It was very scary and great fun. By and by the thing wouldn't snap any more, and then Chatterer grew tired of his queer plaything and began to wonder about the other queer thing. No harm had come from the first one, and so he was sure no harm could come from the other. Chapter 10. Old Mr. Trouble Gets Chatterer at Last. Of course you have guessed what it was that Chatterer had been meddling with. It was a mousetrap, and he had sprung it without getting hurt. Chatterer didn't know that it was a trap. He ought to have known, but he didn't. You see, it was not at all like the traps Farmer Brown's boy had sometimes set for him in the Green Forest. He knew all about those traps and never went near them. Now that there was nothing more exciting about the mousetrap, Chatterer turned his attention to the other queer things. He walked all around it and looked at it from every side. Certainly was queer. Yes, sir, it certainly was queer. It looked something like a little house, only he could see all through it. He put one paw out and touched it. Nothing happened. He tried it again. Then he jumped right on top of it. Still nothing happened. He tried his sharp teeth on it, but he couldn't bite it. You see, it was made of stout wire. Inside was something that looked good to eat. Oh, smelled good, too. Chatterer began to wonder what it would taste like. The more he wondered, the more he wanted to know. There must be some way of getting in, and if he could get in, of course he could get out again. He jumped down to the floor and ran all around the queer little wire house. At each end was a sort of a little wire hallway. Chatterer stuck his head in one. It seemed perfectly safe. He crept a little way in and then backed out in a hurry. Nothing happened. He tried it again. Still nothing happened. "Better keep away," said a small voice down inside him. "Pooh, who's afraid?" said Chatterer. "This thing can't hurt me." Then he crept a little farther in. Right in front of him was a little round doorway with a little wire door. Chatterer pushed the little door with his nose, and it opened a teeny-weeny bit. He drew back suspiciously. Then he tried it again, and this time pushed the little door a little further open. He did this 2 or 3 times until he finally had his head quite inside, and there, right down below him, was that food he so wanted to taste. "I can hop right down and get it, and then hop right up again," said Chatterer. "Don't do it," said the little voice inside. "Corn is plenty good enough. Besides, it is time you were getting back to the old orchard." "It won't take but a minute," said Chatterer, "and I really must know what that tastes like." Then he jumped down. Snap! Chatterer looked up. The little wire door had closed. Old Mr. Trouble had got Chatterer at last. Yes, sir, he certainly had got Chatterer this time. You see, he couldn't open that little wire door from the inside. He was in a trap, the wire rat trap, set by Farmer Brown's boy. Oh dear. Well, that doesn't sound good. Chapter 11 is next. What happened next to Chatterer? And I think we'll stop there. And we'll find out the next time what happened to Chatterer. Good night, Finn and Lamb.